Welcome back to Call Me By Your Game, the podcast where I, your host, Connor McCabe, bring on a guest to hear from them about a meaningful or memorable video game from a particular moment in their life. If you're a listener to the show, then you'll know, for the most part, what I do is I bring someone on to hear about just a perfect little intimate story, a cozy story about a game that means a lot to them. This is a special episode. It's, of course, one of our monthly co-op episodes, co-op episode 46, where I'm going to be talking to a couple people about the Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. A little bit of housekeeping up top is that if there's anything that myself or my guests shared today that you want to find out more information about, if you want to follow us on social media, check out other podcast stuff, if you look below wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on YouTube or your favorite podcast catcher, I've got a bunch of links in the show notes. I organize it so gorgeously. It's my type A personality coming out in those links. So if you want to find out about our Patreon and what we have going on, if you want to check out our TikTok and the fun clips I have from this podcast that come out, or whatever our guests have, just scroll down and you'll find that there. Should be pretty simple if you're used to listening to podcasts. But first and foremost, for the first half of the show, as I make my way up Mount Kof, things are starting to get a little interesting and crazy up here. I've got my first guest for today's episode, so please welcome the editorial director from Digital Eclipse, Chris Kohler.
Hello, I'm here.
Chris, welcome to the podcast. We're here on Mount Kof. I hope that, I didn't bring my hiking shoes, but I've got a good feeling that we're going to figure this out today.
I think everything is going to be just fine. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, we're going to work through this
Regardless,
mystery.
Maybe we'll pick up some abilities that'll help us out. We'll have to see. But Chris, I'm so excited to have you on the show. I know you because I've heard you on a number of video game podcasts over the years. I think I first heard you, I want to say specifically on the Final Fantasy VI episode of Retronauts back in like 2016 or something. I've heard you recur on other shows. I've really liked hearing, what you care about when it comes to games and stuff that you like. But who are you? What do you want to share with the listeners about yourself?
Well, I started doing Retronauts in 2006, so it took 10 years somehow before you heard me on a podcast. But I'm glad you finally got around to it.
Yes.
So I was in the media for basically almost 25 years. I was the longest stint that I did was the editor of Game Life, which was the gaming vertical at Wired magazine, and actually, since 2020, I've been editorial director at the video game development studio Digital Eclipse, and we do, reissues and restorations of classic video games, some in the new format that we're calling the interactive documentary. So if you've heard of things like Atari 50, the anniversary celebration, or the making of Karateka, or our most recent, which is Lamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, it's really about going beyond the kind of retro collection and getting to a point where what we're crafting is a documentary about a story of video game history and using all of those elements that you might find in a retro collection, like video interviews or design documents or prototype games and the games themselves, but putting them together into a story, into a sort of a chronological exploration of a moment in time, a certain designer, a certain company, a certain publisher, some interesting story from gaming history, and just trying to do retro gaming re-releases in a different way, in a history focused way, and really in a sort of a documentary focused way.
Yes, it's been really exciting to see what you and the team have come up with over there over the last few years, and it feels like the dam is just starting to break. Like Atari 50 broke on the scene. I heard so much amazing stuff about the making of Karateka last year, and then out of nowhere, the Jeff Minter story. I didn't even know that was coming. So it's really cool to see what you all have done. With that context of what can help tell a story about a game, more than just playing the game itself in a vacuum.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, now that we kind of have the formula down, we can put these out with some degree of rapidity, which is kind of important because we can't spend too long working on any kind of retro collection, right? You've kind of got to get it done, get it out, and move on to the next thing. So, the fact that we're kind of firing on all cylinders now and getting these things out is it's very exciting. Yeah.
That's awesome. So no 8 to 9 year AAA development cycle for Digital Eclipse games like some of the games we see today.
No, the making of Karateka actually did take us a while because it kind of, without getting too much of on a tangent, like it kind of started even before I joined the company as this kind of a skunkworks project. And fortunately, it was something that we were doing on our own time with our own funding,
Oh, cool.
of which we had very little. And then we were able to get funding to start, self-fund and self-publish these projects. And so the making of Karateka, Lamasoft, the Jeff Minter story are two early examples of us being able to fund our own thing. And now, of course, Digital Eclipse is now an Atari-owned studio. We are part of Atari. So now we can work, within the larger Atari organization to put out our own stuff. And so it's really just a question of like, we're finally able and we're free now to do it the way we think it should be done. So it's a very exciting time for everybody.
Yeah, that's incredibly exciting. Well, congrats to you and the team so far and what you've all been able to do over there. And I forgive me, has there been an announcement on what is to come next for project-wise for Digital Eclipse, or has that not been announced yet?
There has not been an announcement yet.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I was like, I'm going to ask this in the safest way possible.
Sure. Yes.
To not get anybody in trouble. Well, that's really cool. Was there anything else you wanted to share about yourself, Chris, with the audience before we continue moving?
Well, I think, before we move on to, the Prince of Persia series, I mean, just a lot of people know this, but, Karateka, which we covered in depth in our interactive documentary, The Making of Karateka, was Jordan Mechner's first published game. And that was essentially the game in which he was working out a lot of the techniques that he then used to make his next published game, which was Prince of Persia.
Yes.
So Karateka in a lot of ways is sort of like Prince of Persia 0 in a way. I have played a lot of the Prince of Persia games. I played Lost Crown, was very excited about that. Was excited that it was so good. But there's a wonderful, sort of connection now between the work that I've been doing, which, was a multi-year kind of research process into the early days of Jordan Mechner, and now seeing the Prince of Persia series come back is like fantastic. I'm excited that it's back. Yeah.
That's really cool. And like, I'd be lying if I said one of the reasons I reached out to you was that I didn't know about the connection there. But seeing your excitement posting on social media outside of just like thinking, oh, it'd be cool to have Chris on the podcast someday, it felt like the perfect opportunity. So I'm glad this worked out. And yeah, that connection is just so cool. So seeing you express your interest and I think your appreciation for this game was a big reason why I wanted to reach out. So it's very exciting. Well, let's get into, your history with the Prince of Persia series. I'll sort of lead off with mine, which, like I told you, this is my first Prince of Persia game. Somehow have missed all of them over the years. I was even like that prime age when the Sands of Time was coming out on, GameCube, PS2, Xbox, and have never played any of them. So this was sort of an introduction for me. But what about you, Chris? What do you want to share about your history?
We had Prince of Persia on our IBM, compatible computer in the, so it would have been like early 90s that we had that up and running. And I know that my brother and I, who were like, 10, 11, 12 years old at that point, like we definitely put some time into it, but like, Prince of Persia, it's a tough game, I think, for the original Prince of Persia. It's a tough game for like kids to play because you have to be able to deal with that sort of like that harsh time limit. You have this time limit. You can die, very instantaneously. You can put in what feels like a great deal of work and then just sort of like instantly die and oops, now you have to go back all the way to the beginning of the game. And it's something where in this age of like, the roguelike is so much more accepted, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't really something that we played it a lot, but I mean, we never really beat it or anything like that, So I was more fascinated by it, because of what I now understand is the pioneering use of rotoscoping to create this human-like animation. It looked and felt very different from every other game. And now I understand it's because there really was that like, there really was an element of human performance that was at the core of this game that grounded it in realistic physics in a way that other games simply did not have, because the physics behind other video games were made up. You know what I mean? They weren't really based on anything. Now, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing is kind of up to the individual person's taste. But at any rate, didn't think about it too much until because and nobody really thought about the series that much until Ubisoft brought it back with Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and this looked very appealing. And I played the heck out of I loved Sands of Time. I played it on the GameCube. I thought it was brilliant. I thought the story. I mean, it made, again, very significant improvements in terms of storytelling. It was kind of an early game in that PS2, GameCube, Xbox era where, 3D games were kind of moving from the sort of jankiness of the low poly Nintendo 64 into something kind of like going through these growing pains of approaching something like movie-like graphics and presentation, cutscenes and things like that, and like stuff like Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, stuff I think like Eternal Darkness, you know what I mean? Like those early those games in that generation that were like making these moves toward the cinematic presentation. But Sands of Time also just brilliantly it took what was great about that it really, I mean, it kind of invented its own gameplay, right? I mean, the gameplay that was all about like, traversing, you'd step into this. Did you play Sands of Time? Like,
haven't touched
later?
It. No, it's something that I got on for Steam for $2 last year, and I've told myself that I'm playing it later this year.
That's your next one. That's your next Prince of Persia game that you've got to play, because it really is very special the way that it used the way that it brought the gameplay into 3D, and then of course it had very famously the Dagger of Time, which what it essentially did was it let you have that gameplay where it's like, oops, you jumped the wrong direction and you impaled yourself on spikes, and it's just like Prince of Persia 1, except instead of saying game over, go all the way back to the beginning of the game, you use the Dagger of Time. You could rewind time and get yourself off the spikes and give yourself extra chances to pull off that sort of perfect hit. And the story was very well told. It was just great. Later Prince of Persia games, famously kind of took the series in an M-rated direction, because that's kind of what happened to a lot of those series during that PS2. It happened to Jak and Daxter. Yeah. Like, for some reason, it's like Jak and Daxter was really well liked, and they were like, he needs to have a gun and he needs to say the F word more.
He needs to not be able to smile ever.
Yeah. And they did that to Jak and Daxter, which I thought was very kind of strange. Yeah. They did that to Prince of Persia. That was just sort of what was happening, I guess, because there was this shift into, we got to have that M rating on the box, because that's the audience that we got to hit with these things. And series that maybe should not have done that with, ended up getting that. So you got Prince of Persia: The Warrior Within and Two Thrones, but it was this like renaissance of Prince of Persia, because they were coming out with these games that were all, quality games. And then I played them, and I played Prince of Persia 2008, which was this very interesting game for the PS3, where they reinvented it again. They got rid of all of the sort of like M-rated, gritty edgelord, a woman in a metal bikini kind of stuff. Yeah. But then in Prince of Persia 2008, the whole thing was you couldn't die. Like,
gotcha.
You never got set. It's like if you fell off a cliff, you just restored to the cliff. Every time. And so it was this experiment in like, well, what if you never die in video game? And it was interesting, but then I think people realized that there actually do need to be stakes in video game, or else you will have you're not going to have as much of it's like it loses some of the appeal. And then after that, the series kind of went away. And we haven't had a Prince of Persia game for a really long time. And really what happened, I don't think this is I think this is kind of understood, that like they started working on a Prince of Persia game, and then that became Assassin's Creed.
Yes.
And so all the people that had worked on the Prince of Persia games and all of the design they were doing, it ended up being what started out as a Prince of Persia spin-off ended up kind of just becoming its own thing and becoming huge and having its own up and down, kind of cycles. And then also if you read, and so this is all totally public knowledge now, but if you read Jordan Mechner's graphic novel Replay, Ubisoft moved him to France to do a AAA next gen Prince of Persia game that got canceled. And then they started another Prince of Persia game that was going to be Princess of Persia, and that got canceled. And then Jordan was no longer on it, but then that team, the core team members in Montpellier in France that he'd been working with, ended up doing Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. So after a series of aborted attempts to like get another Prince of Persia game going, we get The Lost Crown, and it's a masterpiece. I mean, it's amazing. It's this wonderful. I love 2D Metroidvanias. You know, the Metroids and the Vanias, both of them. And so this is just this like wonderful exploration of what you can do with that genre. It takes that acrobatic gameplay from Sands of Time. It puts it on a 2D plane, and it just has a really lovely storyline that goes along with it, but then it adds the thing that is the real strength of a Metroidvania, which is the ability to explore at your leisure. And feel not that you are like sort of on this linear pathway, but that there's a kind of a world out there for you to go explore and find things. And that when you do explore and when you find things, it greatly rewards you for those things, and it keeps you going. And it really captures that sort of addiction loop that makes those things so entertaining, but it does it with very smooth, combat is actually great. But really, it's just what it has to capture is that locomotion itself, in and of itself, just running and jumping around is in and of itself like gripping and fun. So I hoped it would be good. And a couple hours in, I was like, oh no, it's incredible.
Yes, this was an example of a game that I took a chance on trying the demo out, which the demo is an interesting thing in itself, where they give you did you play the demo at all before the game actually came out?
I didn't. Did I? That's a good question. I don't think I did. No, I just bought the game and played it.
Gotcha. Well, they made this interesting choice where in the demo, it opens up in the first like sort of arena in Mount Koff, so after the introduction, and you have additional powers that you won't actually have at that point. So it allows you to experiment with what is to come. And I'll be honest, like the taste of a few of those abilities really hooked me in that demo.
Nice.
I think I played it for a half hour and was like, I think I'm going to buy this game. Yeah.
That's interesting, because sometimes that can backfire, because if they were to give you things that would take place too much later in the game, they might trick you into thinking the game was overly complicated, that it gave you too much at the beginning. Whereas in reality, I mean, what you want is that slow ramp up. But that's cool that that having been given multiple late game kind of powers, you still fell into it.
Totally. There were a few of the time abilities, I think, and I think what they did well is that it wasn't like an overload of that, but just a couple to sort of whet that appetite. But yeah, so this game, as far as like the history and context of The Lost Crown, this game was announced at Summer Games Fest last year. I think that was the first time that like a trailer was released. But like you had said, this was from the development team, or some of the people from Ubisoft Montpellier, including people who had worked on the Rayman, one of the Rayman games, and there might be another that I'm forgetting. But this game came out in January of this year. Was kind of like, I don't know how you felt, but coming off of the year 2024, which was just an overload of quality, incredible quality games, I was like, oh, we're off to the races already with Prince of Persia.
I know, and it's too bad because, typically the stuff that releases so early in the year, by the time it gets time for nominating for awards and things like that, you're at a real disadvantage because of like recency bias, right? So I hope that I hope that once we get to the point where people are start doing nominations for the awards for the 2025 award shows, things like that, that Prince of Persia: Lost Crown gets considered, because it really truly is special.
I hope the same. I think even just because I played this game right when it came out. Did you also play it like pretty soon upon release?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's been a few months at this point,
Right.
to where I just doing, sort of refreshing myself with the game was reminded, oh, this is my favorite game that I've completed that's new this year so far. Are you playing Rebirth at all?
I'm not yet.
Yes.
One of the problems with Rebirth is that I'm a dad and there's 4 people in the house, and the PS5 is on the big TV, and if I want to play Rebirth, I'm like fighting with 3 other people for like TV time.
Yes.
I played Remake actually during like paternity leave. So as long as the baby was asleep, you know what I mean? We're
Yes.
good to go. And I could sink a ton of time into that. Now I'm looking at it and people are like, this game, like Rebirth is legit like 80 hours,
Yes.
if you get tied up in any side quest stuff. I'm like, okay, like I want to play this, but I have to be in the right place. But really though, it's just like playing stuff on the Switch.
Yes.
Because it's like I just played Princess Peach Showtime, and I just finished up the game called Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, which I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a throwback / parody of the Legend of Zelda CDI games.
Oh, interesting.
That were done in the 90s, and it's basically like it's a really, really competently done, very fun side-scrolling adventure game in that sort of 16-bit. I don't know what else to compare it to, but something like not like the side-scrolling Ease games or Popful Mail or something like that, but you know what I mean? Sort of like an adventure game, but it's side-scrolling.
Sure.
Or like Zelda 2, because that was kind of what the Zelda CDI games were going
Gotcha.
after. But I played that, so I've just been playing, and I played another Code. So actually, interestingly enough, like it's all games with women protagonists.
Yes.
For some reason, like in the last this year after Prince of Persia, which had that been Princess of Persia, would have been the sweep.
Yeah.
But it's like I played another Code, and then Princess Peach, and then Arzette, and then literally I've got the Valis games sitting right here, and Shantae and River City Girls, and like for some reason, all the good games have women at the helm now, except for Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. But I did find it very interesting and very, very deliberate on their part that you are tasked with rescuing the prince. You're rescuing the Prince of Persia.
Yes, I was reading, I think it was a Game Rant interview with one of the crew members, and how that was like an intentional choice for them to, and it's not that the subverting the sort of trope of damsel in distress is all that new, but it's still, I find it can still be refreshing for a game like this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of Switch time for you, it sounds like, lately.
Lots of Switch time. I also have and also the Steam Deck. Fortunately, the Steam Deck is also now here to let me play a lot of things that aren't on the Switch.
Yes.
But it's not like I'm just doing it because the thing has to say Nintendo on the front, or I'm not going to play it. It's like that. It's that portability, and really that it's not even portability. It's the personal nature of it.
Yes.
It's like because, and again, to kind of bring it back to Prince of Persia: Lost Crown. It's a long game.
Yes.
It's a long involved. It is not as you would think. It was like, oh yeah, sure, 2D Metroidvania, 20 hours, I'm going to be done. No, it was in this thing for like 30, almost 40 hours.
Wow.
I mean, a long time to finish this game. I might be slightly exaggerating.
Yeah.
But either way, it's a big game. It longer than I played Metroid Dread.
Same here.
And so like, I need, for me to be able to just be sort of sitting on the couch playing it by myself and not bothering anybody else, that it's a personal, sort of contained thing is really important. And what's nice about it is that it runs great on the Switch. It looks really, really good on the Switch. So I had no issues. It does apparently have loading times, and of course it does have loading times between areas on the Switch that I guess might not be in other versions, but listen, man, I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Leading up to this game, another thing that convinced me to A, get it, but B, get it on the Switch as opposed to a different console was the Digital Foundry review on how well this game seemed to run. And they were transparent, saying that, hey, it doesn't run quite as well as the Xbox Series X or the PS5 version, but it is pretty much up to snuff. And that was mostly my experience as well. There may have been... It was funny. I had less frame rate drops in gameplay than I did cutscenes. Did you experience any of that at all?
No.
No.
No, or I didn't experience anything where I felt like, and again, I may have, those things may have happened to me, but it wasn't something where I ever felt a sensation of like, oh, I'm disappointed with the performance here.
Yeah, that's where I landed despite like bumping into that a few times. I was like, "Hey, I'm
Mhm.
having an amazing time and this is not taking away from that for me."
Right.
Yeah. As far as getting into the game though, when we talk about it, what is something that sticks out to you that you want to start this discussion with for an element that you really thought it succeeded in?
I think just that feeling of like living, breathing world
Sure.
that like all of this stuff is sort of going on without me, and I'm just like an interloper here. I mean, everything from like what I think about the most is I think the great gameplay around the jail and the jailer.
Mm,
The fact that you sort of wander into this area and you don't really know what's going on, and you end up like meeting the jailer, and he may capture you and then put you in jail, and then you have to break out of jail, and then it's like, okay, I'll just avoid this guy, but then you realize later on they don't really, I think they may explicitly, or they try to nudge you, it's like once you get the power to switch between dimensions, that's what allows you to actually defeat the jailer. And so
yes.
you want to be able to do that, but then also realizing that like there's, once you have the key that kind of lets you through some of the doors, like it's just like, it just feels so organic. It just doesn't feel like a designed video game, or like, all the climbing up all of the rooms in the library, or
Yes.
when you're down in the depths in the sewers, and like, you just keep, I mean, the other thing is it's a long game, but god, the map is massive.
Yes.
It's so huge, and you're going down in there, and I'm like checking back on the map, I'm like, how, it's like, should I turn back? Because I'm the sort of player that's, I think a lot of people do this, where it's just like, okay, well, where am I supposed to go? I'm supposed to go over there. Okay, well, I see another pathway down here. Let me follow that down, because if where I'm supposed to go is up here, but there's another pathway, there's probably some bonus down here,
Yes.
that I should go grab.
Totally.
So let me go explore this a little bit, find the bonus. Well, you start going the wrong way, and the next thing you know, you've been going the wrong way for like half an hour.
Yes.
It's like, oh my god, how far does this go? Do I have to like, do I have to back out? It's like making that decision of like, do I back out? Like,
Yeah.
do I back out and backtrack to where I'm supposed to be going, or do I just keep going with this? And ultimately, the great thing is you could just keep going and do whatever, find something else, and you'll probably, past a certain point, like figure out a way to kind of like fast travel or backtrack back to where
Yes.
you need to be. But as it really is kind of like magical, the way that it just opens up and opens up, and really just seems to have so many secrets hidden
Yes.
behind everything that you're looking at, that you will eventually open up or not. Because once I finished the game, I mean, I was kind of like, I could go back in here and I could do some of this stuff, but I just sort of played it for such a long time, and I
Yeah.
was like, I think I'm all right. Especially kind of knowing what some of the other things were that it wanted me to do. I was like, I'm probably pretty good.
I had my fill. Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel like it's interesting to hear you say that. I haven't talked to just about anybody, with just about anybody about this game yet. So a few of the things you expressed really rang true for me. The first of which that you brought up is something I don't think I would have brought up myself, which is the sort of living, breathing world of it all, and how that all does really connect well together. And it's so often, and I'm sure there are examples in this game, you see the seams of like, oh, this person was designing a level. That makes sense to me. That it's a video game, but this world, whether it was like how the world was structured, what biomes were next to each other, or just like how a room would function, I felt like that is so true that it felt very lived in.
Mhm.
Both from, I think, like the different enemies and characters you would interact with, but also just some of the environment detail and the way things would feel like it. You said breathing, but whether it's something flapping in the wind or
Right.
whatnot, I just felt
Yeah.
like I felt that so true throughout the game. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like everything seems to be really placed with intentionality.
Hmm.
It's like when there's certain things where I'm trying to remember, there's certain puzzles and things like that, and then you sort of you see some puzzles, but then you meet the person who put the puzzles there, and the
Yeah.
person who put the puzzles there tells you why those puzzles are there, and it kind of leads back to something. So it's like everything, it's not just sort of random. It's and again like the scholars in the library that have gone mad, all that kind of stuff. It's like everything has been really thought about, like who would be here and what would happen to them.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest and say that like if a game is fun enough, I don't always need the additional level of intentionality that you're talking about of like an explanation or lore. But in a game like this that I think really does that well, it's icing on the cake, and it really gives it an extra level of like sometimes narrative polish that really works for me at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
You also had mentioned just the ability to explore and sort of just continue to kick a rock down a cavern, essentially. And there were moments too, I think, early on in the game where, like, as you can continue to go through the depths at the very beginning, where I was just following paths for who knows how long, and it was really fun to see, at least to me, how even the very few abilities you have at that time, how they can still lend you to explore. One thing that I think was vital to all of this is something I don't know how I can forget, because it was maybe my favorite addition to this style of game, is the sort of memories that you can capture of the location and like
Yes.
essentially the screenshots you could take.
Yeah, because I mean, so basically, in Metroidvania style games, I mean, in good ones anyway, you will often come across places where you cannot go, things that you cannot do, and you have to get some power and then come back to that. And now on the Nintendo Switch, you could always just like take a screenshot if you wanted to remind yourself, or write it down, or just sort of raw dog it and be like, I'll remember that, and then try to come back later, which is kind of, what I do. But with they've actually built this in where when you see something and you want to make a note of it, you can take a screenshot within the game, and then it will tie that screenshot to that part of the map. So that when you open up your map, you can see where you took memories. And in fact, you can't just take them willy-nilly, because you actually unlock during the game the ability to have more of those memories, but you're restricted to a certain number. Then you can go back and look and be like, oh, right, down here is where there's these glowy blocks. And again, you don't know how to break the glowy blocks. You just know there's glowy blocks. Clearly, that's something that you would want to go back there for. And so that was definitely very, very clever as well, especially because especially just because the map is so huge that to just try to just say, well, I'll just remember to go back there later. It wouldn't really work. It wouldn't really work as well. You'd be doing a lot more backtracking and a lot more like, oh wait, why is this part of the map blocked off? And you get back there, it's like, oh right, it's not glowy blocks. It's
it's like that
door.
grappling hook thing or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. There's one point specifically that like I must have, before I got the ability, came back to 5 times, because I kept thinking maybe now I can get across it, and it was this one large cavern where you need the grappling hook, which is one of the last abilities that you get.
Very late.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that took a lot of like me foolishly returning to that spot repeatedly, almost. Yeah. You had talked about a little bit in your preamble of the locomotion and the traversal in this game. The most recent new to me Metroidvania style game that I had played was Ori and the Blind Forest. Have you played that?
Oh, okay. I played a few hours of it when it came out, so a while back.
I ended up preferring this game for a few reasons, but that game was, I think, my favorite traversal up until this point, of just being able to sort of flow through a level. And I think it's just such a masterful thing they've done with this game. Did you have like an ability that was most fun for you to use traversal-wise, or any traversal moments you wanted to talk about?
Well, I mean, something that I did want to talk about was the way that it integrated the classic Prince of Persia platforming challenges. Yes. So you do have scenarios in which just to get from point A to point B, you have to do a little, like jumping on a pole, swinging around the pole, making a leap, bouncing off a wall, doing that. But I think they realized that because of the backtracky nature of Metroidvanias, they couldn't like make you do that every time you pass through a certain area. So a lot of the Prince of Persia platforming challenges are they're sort of separated off on their own. They're off in a corner of a room or something. And then what they'll do is they'll take a pickup, a coin called a Xerxes, right?
Yes.
It's this coin you use to buy certain objects, and they'll stick it in the corner so that you'll get that coin as you're doing the platform challenge, but you don't get the coin unless your feet land on solid ground, because the coin will trail you. You'll only get it when your feet land on solid ground. And that's how they get you to master and complete the full platforming challenge that they've laid out for you. And then once you're done wall jumping and hanging and your feet are back on solid ground, that's when you get the reward, which I thought was very, very clever. A great way to essentially say, like, hey, like, here's an optional, platforming challenge off to the side here. Do it. You never have to do it again. But also, you got to do it.
Yeah.
You have to actually do it. You can't just sort of like save scum or, whatever your way through it. It's like you've actually got to complete the whole thing, the full run. There was one challenge, a late game challenge, and it was the extra room in the elevator. Like, you have to get the key.
Is that with the just seemingly never ending spinning spike cylinders?
That's the one.
I didn't do every challenge in the game, but that one I was determined to do, and I think it took at least an hour of repetitive attempts. Did you end up doing that one as well?
I did it as well, and it probably took me about an hour. And I was so like, I was like, okay, I can do this. I got this key. I think I spent money on the key to even get the key, and then I get in the room, and the only thing past that is just a challenge. I'm like, okay, I can do this. It's like, you gotta, you have to memorize, because it's always the same sequence of spikes. So just, I know where I gotta be. Okay, the next sequence comes out. I gotta put my shadow down on the floor, then jump, and then shadow down into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it all. And then the funny thing is, God, I should have taken a video of this, because like the back half of it, I did in like one shot. Like, it took me so long to kind of like, it's like I did like it took me so long to master getting up to like the halfway point. And then once they all started coming out, and it was like, once you got to the shifting dimensions point, where it's like, you had to shift dimensions so that sometimes the spikes were, because the way it works is that you get this ability to shift dimensions, and then, there's things that only exist in this dimension, but then when you swap dimensions, things that didn't exist before come out. So there's sort of ghosts in the dimension. So anyway, once I got to that point, I think I did it in like 1 or 2 tries.
Wow.
And like did the whole thing. I just never missed anything. And I beat the whole challenge. I was like, oh my God, I did it. And I go up to the treasure chest, and it's a freaking outfit skin.
Yes.
And I was so mad. Like, it was the only time playing this game that I was actually like angry, or really just like I was in disbelief.
Yes.
I was in disbelief that the reward, it wasn't even an ingot that I could use to forge a better weapon.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a Xerxes coin. It wasn't shit.
Yes.
It was a skin that made my outfit purple. But I will tell you that I wore that purple outfit for the rest of the game.
Yes.
Because I was like, I did this thing, and I'm gonna at least wear the crapo reward.
Yes.
But I was so mad.
Gosh, that point too, like, drove me to the point of being like, okay, I think I might just have to move on. And then, like you said, that sort of unsatisfactory reward at the end, I was like, wait, what if it just made me question my choices.
Right. I'm looking around the room going like, okay, no. What's the real reward after I get this? Like, where do I get to go? What do I get to do? What's my cool thing? Because, the funny thing is, prior to that, I think every reward in the game, and this was coming, this is late in the game that you're tackling this. And like, this was like, I felt the rewards for all the things that I did were actually very good. I think that's one of the strengths of the game is that is that when you do something, or when you do have a breakthrough and you're like, wait a minute, I think I can go over there. And then you go over there and you feel really smart, and then it gives you something good that you're going to want to use, like, not just like extra money. Although again, like, extra money always comes in handy. I think this is one of those Metroidvanias, and I think this is fine. Like, I think this is totally fine. It gets easier as you get further into the game. And I think that is really because if you are thorough and you find everything, and I think this actually should be the way these games work, right? It's like, there are definitely some games where it's like, okay, I'm being clever, or I think I'm being clever, maybe the game is leading me to think I'm being clever, but I feel like I'm smartly solving these puzzles, solving these challenges, and I'm getting the bonus extra rewards that other players are not going to find because they're not as smart or as thorough as I am. But I need to feel that was for something,
Yes.
And that later on, I need to be able to feel like, oh, because I was very smart and I got these extra health pickups and I farmed gems to buy this, thing, and I found the extra ingots so I could upgrade my sword, I need to get into a boss fight and be like, damn, I stomped that dude first try because I got all these cool powers, and it means something. There's some games where it feels like they simply expect you to go find all that stuff.
Yes.
And then you have to even get to that to even you don't even get really an advantage. You're like at a profound disadvantage unless you do that. But Prince of Persia, I felt, puts you at an advantage the more of that stuff that you find. Yeah. And I think that's the right way to go about it.
I think I would agree there. And I think you might even be able to see that, especially when you do maybe fight a mini boss or a regular boss, knowing that, okay, I do have an edge because of my thoroughness or the specific upgrades that I've chosen, which is a whole nother element I do like about this game. But that maybe a speedrunner or someone who is great could still do this without having like certain
right
buffs or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. And good for them. But I'm just going to outfit myself with whatever I need to do to just to steamroll it. But it does feel good. It does feel good because in the beginning of the game, I mean, there's elements where I'm like, at the beginning of the game, the first couple hours, like I would die and be like, oh, I'm going all the way back here. Like there's no checkpoints. Like I'm going back to the last save point. And like, that's fine. That's how Metroid works. That's how Castlevania Symphony of the Night works. They're not like checkpointing you along the way. So fine, great. But it seems it's like, okay, I guess I really have to, because you don't have a lot of health at the beginning. You don't have a lot of weapons or moves at your disposal. So it's like, okay, I guess I got to be really careful and like scrounge, for every checkpoint.
Yes.
It's like as soon as I feel like a checkpoint is coming up, I should really hunt for it, because it's really important, because I'm down to, I don't have potions. I'm down to just one life bar. I'm going to try to get it. But then, towards the end of the game, it's not nearly, I think, that serious. I think if you've been upgrading your weapons and your life and you have like extra potions and stock and all that kind of stuff, It's like you don't really find that like, oh no, I died, I lost all this progress.
Yeah, so much more wiggle room by that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel the getting in the sort of routine of actually checking in on this checkpoints as I'm like, especially as you're diving deeper and deeper into a cavern or exploring an area. It was like a learning experience where I wasn't doing it early on, and the game taught me to do that by me not wanting to have to retrace my steps so much.
Yes.
It felt like a similar experience. I revisit everything, or I get to things late in life, whether it's pop culture, video games. So I played the original Half-Life last year for the first time.
Okay.
And that game was also taught me a lesson of, hey, buddy, you're going to want to save a lot. And when I wouldn't do that, I was definitely punished. So this felt like a similar experience in a totally different way, with the checkpoints at least.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it shows you like when you get close to a checkpoint, right? There's this sort of golden leaves, sort of like showing you like, hey, checkpoint down here, which I think is a very nice touch, because you could be, I mean, this game has so many divergent paths and it lets you go to so many places. Like you could be really, really close to the next checkpoint and not know it. So you actually do need a little bit of like, hey, guess what? It's down here. Go down here, save your game. The game clearly doesn't want you, to just like constantly have to redo sections. But it will make you do that if you're not smart. So it does train you, I think, early on. Be like, hey, like get smart about this.
Absolutely.
Start building out that map, but don't just go off exploring.
Totally.
And then once you get to that that little hub area where there's a shop, and where you can start working on the prophecy, you start bringing the pieces back for that and stuff like that. But then it's like there's this just constant. It does a really nice job of this constant like you're always wanting to pick up diamonds because you can see in the store or at the weapon forge that there's some cool new thing that you want, and so you're constantly you're kind of metagaming that while you're playing and thinking about like, oh, when am I gonna have enough money? You get this cool thing you get usually is a really good, kind of upgrade. You can't equip everything. So you're kind of just making decisions about how to spec yourself out. If you get a new amulet hole, basically, and it's just like, this is, it's like every time you get one, it's like, oh, sweet. That's a major find because, now I can kind of reshuffle my my amulets around, and it's got everything. It's got all those cool things that you want, and just coupled with a design that is like every time you enter a new area, it's like, oh, what is this? And I think what's really important to that is, in constructing it as a small 2D kind of experience, it's like you can, with a smaller team of people, you can create some beautiful, unexpected, out of the ordinary, grand areas. But you can do it quickly and you can do a lot of them.
Absolutely.
And so I think that really, the 2D, smaller size nature of it really helps as far as just being able to just generate many, many different types of environments without saying, well, if we're adding sewers, that's another year of development time. Right now. Yeah.
Speaking of those environments, I was thinking back to them on how varied they were, and I really enjoyed them. But the standout for me personally in the game, because I'd like to hear yours if you've got one, was the sort of like ocean nautical area.
Yeah,
it was so cool.
Oh my gosh!
Especially,
so it's like
I think you enter and the whole place is like frozen in time, like the waves are frozen and stuff.
Right. So I'm forgetting some of the details, but of course, and again, it's all connected together in a very fun way because it's like you first of all, you feel like you're exploring a building, right? And so you're just sort of inside a building or the outside of the building. And then like towards the edge of the map, once you open that map part up, you can see it's like just like ocean waves and like ending in something. And and so you end up like getting on a ship that's frozen in time, and then you're going across the ocean. And then you can even, there's a part at which you climb a tower that's in a different area, and it tells you like, oh, like it intimates that you should just jump off the tower, jump off the cliff. And then you jump off the cliff, and then I forget what happens, but like there's a whole scene in which you're like falling down and you get items or whatever it is. And then you land in the ocean, and like it's and it sort of connects it all together. But you're right, like these ships that are like frozen in time. And very, very clever stuff. Just full of these really, really interesting like takes on what can we do with a Metroidvania style thing. And again, just like constant sense of surprise and delight, I think is in these. And it really, again, it helps that, I mean, it's so vast that you can be in the forest for forever, and then the next thing you're traveling across the ocean, and then you're back, and then you're again like climbing up the library or whatever it is. But like everything you get into, it's or going down into the sand pits and dropping down into that, and like everything is just like, it's like I just like found another video game buried in the video game. But it's all so snappy and quick. You don't spend too much time down in any one area. Does not get repetitive, does not get boring. But just wildly inventive.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the it's interesting because I felt like almost the entire time I played this game, I was moving at a good clip. The pacing felt good, which of course is dictated largely by the player. But like you said, I wasn't getting really bored by almost anything. I was engaged, and yet it just went on forever, and I couldn't believe that it continued to expand past areas that I thought it would.
It's at first it was like you look at the map that's not filled in yet, and you kind of get a sense of like, oh, okay, it's like I'm in this starting area, and then there's going to be like it's going to fill in this area, that one, and that one. And whatever you're thinking, it's literally like twice as big as you actually think it's going to be max. And it's like you will get to an area, it's like, oh my God, are they really going to fill in all this blank area on this map with more level? Yeah, and they are. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was operating having played Dread in the last few years. I was thinking, oh, there's going to be maybe 5 or 6 of these areas. And then when it just continued, which I think this is overall, where I'm standing now is that I do still prefer Dread by just like a slight edge to this game. Not that they need to be compared. But this is, I think, one area that I appreciated more in The Lost Crown was sort of the world and like the just the polish that each area seemed to have.
Right. Yeah. It really it's the just the sheer amount of detail, or like, you know, you're in the pirate ship kind of area, and it's like the traps, the clattering bone traps that set off arrows and things, you know, it's just like everything. There's just so much going on. And then it really, once you do get the grappling hook, you know, by the end of it, then it's like now you're pulling off all kinds of acrobatic aerial sequences and maneuvers that just look and feel very cool. You know, by the end of the game, which you're really comfortable with everything, and you're grappling across chasms, and, you know, looking at something that just seems to be insurmountable, but you start to understand like, oh no, I see. I'm gonna jump up here and then, you know, drop my shadow here and wall jump back and then shadow up to it, and you kind of plan it out. And the importance of, again, it being in super zoomed out 2D is you get to see it all, figure out what the plan of action is, and then execute, and then you do it, and you just feel great.
Yes, Gene, you're almost flying through the world at the end, by the end of it at least.
Yeah,
with your abilities.
And then again, when you do it, when you do something and you don't even have to think about it, and you pull it off the first try, you know, you register it as like, yeah, I'm getting good at this.
Totally. I loved, like, I would going into a little challenge like that or a traversal space and being like, ooh, I would love to try this, to get this on the first try. Those are always satisfying, but even when I wouldn't, I did have so much fun figuring out the sort of puzzle traversal nature of moving, whether it was like a challenge like you brought up that leads to a Xerxes coin, or just a way to a new spot. One thing that I want to give a little space to talk about that we haven't touched on too much is the combat and sort of the building out of your abilities. You had mentioned the amulet slots that you have in this game. Do you remember how you like built your Sargon, like, and what you leaned on ability wise for the amulets?
There were certain ones where I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally going to use them. But first of all, I mean, I think one of the first ones you get is like an extra life bar. And for me, like, having an extra life bar is like everything all wrapped up into one. It's like, this is like having an extra life bar is like, I can do more damage because I'm going to stay alive longer and be able to do more damage. It's like I can, potentially squeak through something and then go save my game, whereas I might have died. So, I mean, that extra life bar for me is always something that I go with.
It never left my amulet spot. I just kept upgrading it too.
Oh yeah, and that's the other thing is that you can go to the forge and you can upgrade this stuff, and it's like, like that was the first thing I poured money into, because eventually it's got you upgrade it twice and you get 3 extra life bar, just for having the one amulet there. And again, it's very helpful because some of the boss battles in this game are intense. They're multi-phase, extensive boss battles, and you're going to need that that help. And so there were other things that I definitely used, but why don't you tell me some of the ones you used, and then I
Sure.
can
One that
remember.
comes to mind, and this ended up being sort of an aha moment for me, was I realized that I was often, especially with the lighter enemies, launching them into the air and then rising up to hit them. And because I had gotten in such a habit of that, I end up leaning on an amulet that increases your air damage, like when you're in the air.
Oh, okay.
So then
Right.
I ended up doing so much of the combat in this game like 10 feet off the ground as opposed to like pressing the X button on the ground. So that was one that, like, when thinking about it for me, the extra air damage that I really leaned on. Big time.
Yeah. I mean, certainly. And yeah, and it kind of goes to show, like, there's a great deal of amulets. There's more than you can can equip all at once, and so it's really, I think it is sort of asking you the question of, like, on the one hand, it's like you have amulets that sort of maybe push you towards trying new things,
Yes.
but then it really is sort of asking you the question of, like, well, what is your personal style of play?
Totally.
And how would you? Because I think there's amulets that it's like, oh, the more you parry, the more of a benefit that you get. So it's really asking you, like, two things, like, one, have you tried parrying, and two, like, how much of a parrier are you? Do you think you're gonna glean the the use
like the benefit of that? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely found in this game, like, it did change how I played. I ended up, even fighting bosses, I would jump in the air and then start my attacks because I would just get, that additional percentage of damage. But I wouldn't say that I ever mastered the combat. I played on normal difficulty, which they actually have way more, like, accessibility options than I knew about with difficulty sliders. All that being said is that I sort of had a good mix of, like, parrying and dodging, but I was often just, like, getting out of the way if I had that option, really.
Yeah. I think there was one, what is it? There was an amulet that was like creates a time bubble around you when you
I think
successfully
it's if you parry.
Yeah. So I think I was using that one for a while.
Big time, me too. Combat wise, did you have any moments looking back, whether it's a boss fight or like a learning experience? Was there any combat moments that stuck out to you that you wanted to highlight today?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's also, we played this
I feel
game 3 months ago, so it is a little hard to remember back then.
Right. I thought that the again, as I said, the boss fights really stuck with me in that they are, they were pretty complex.
Yes.
Oh, I really enjoyed the mechanic where you have this golden chance to parry a specific attack and then do a big cinematic attack on the enemy. I thought that was a really good idea. I mean, literally, like, there's, like, the enemy shines, golden, or there's a, sort of a golden thing, and so, like, oh, better if I parry this one, I'm going to go into this big cinematic kind of thing and do big damage. So that's nice that you can kind of see that and maybe turn the battle around in that regard. I really liked when there was the main boss of the game.
Yes.
You don't have the power to control time, but he actually gets that. Or you don't have the power to do the Prince of Persia style rewind, the Sands of Time style rewind, but he finds that.
Yes.
And so you start battling him and you realize that he's rewinding time. He's doing the Prince of Persia Sands of Time to you every time you start, getting the advantage on him. So I thought that was very funny. That was very clever. The final boss fight itself was like going up against Kefka at the end of Final Fantasy VI. It was wild.
Yeah.
There's just it just, the game gets and then there's the fight against Dead King Darius. I mean, there's everything that the game sort of vaguely hints at, it throws in there, and it's like just keeps escalating until this massive final boss fight against God.
Yes.
It's really got it delivers on the sense of scale.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, I'm there with you. Whether it was like, an earlier main boss, or like I'm thinking of the guy, especially because I love that nautical area so much. But
Yes.
your
Yeah.
your friend, the like largest of your crew, which is, I'm kind of getting sidetracked here, but I thought it was such an interesting way to use your like sort of what were they called? The Immortals, the crew that Sargon is a part of, and
Right.
basically having your main bosses in the game, with some exceptions, being battles against them.
Yeah, because the way the story works is that it's sort of like it pits everybody against each other, and it's like some people, so you think you're on the right side, but then some of your buddies don't actually think you're on the right
Yes.
side, and there's shifting loyalties, and people aren't really sure who to trust.
Yes.
So I think that is kind of clever, because you do end up, as you say, going up in boss battles against your friends, and then death isn't really death, because what's happening on Mount Kaf is sort of suspended in time. And so it really, and the story is great. It's a complex story that they're trying to tell, but they pull it off, and they pull it off in ways that sort of it's you find that you sort of stumble upon these sequences, or you stumble upon your friends, your fellow immortals,
Yes.
At what seem to be random times, but the story keeps evolving in what feels like a very comprehensible kind of way.
Definitely.
But yeah, it is fun that they essentially put you against your friends, because there's this idea, and really even at the end of the game, I mean, nobody is really sure. It's like there's two ways of looking at it, essentially. And the person who is the villain isn't really the person that you fight. The person that everybody decides actually is the big jerk of the game is not actually a person who's like as it's not the person that you're chasing against or fighting against.
Yes.
So it is all about different very Rashomon, very different views on the same incident.
Absolutely. Right? I felt that by the time we get to the end of the game and some mysteries are revealed and some truths on maybe, let's say, spoilers are totally fine. I don't know why I'm walking around it, but that the true Prince of Persia, that ended up feeling quite devastating to me, as far as like, oh, this person is the way that they are because of an awful tragedy that befell them, but they fell fully into that sort of evil nature. The final person that you fight, the name is escaping me at this moment, but the narrative of the game I was mostly positive on, but that moment just felt like a blow to the heart almost, being like, oh, this person is sort of past saving sort of thing, which happens in games. Yeah, enjoyed that. While we sort of like maybe if there's any last thoughts that we have, or anything we didn't get to share about, this is a good time to bring that up. One thing that I really enjoyed in this game, which we haven't mentioned yet, was the voice acting. Whether it was that I just liked, trying to do my best British accent by myself, or like repeating the voices afterwards, which can be fun, or just hearing the way that the performers sort of dove into a performance. I love the voice acting in this game. Did you have, whether it's that or other elements like music, that you haven't gotten to highlight yet?
I did. So I didn't play it this way, but a lot of people were talking about how they played it through in Farsi for the authentic, fully authentic, Persian essentially experience, ancient Persian experience. In fact, that's how Jordan said he played it through as well. So you can consider doing that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the voice acting, I mean, everything was just on all cylinders, remarkably well done, except for that one reward at the end of that one challenge.
Yes, absolutely.
So I give it a 6.8 out of 10.
Yeah, because of that.
Yes.
That's so great. What was there an element? I know that you had mentioned, thanks for bringing that up, by the way, about the alternative dialogue option there. I know that too, doing some research, that one of the two composers, Mentrix, I believe is an Iranian composer.
Yes.
And then Gareth Coker was someone who also contributed to the composition as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had any kind of experience here in Iranian music or ancient Persian, music, or really in storytelling to be able to say something, approaching any level of definitiveness here. But certainly I've heard, and I think it's wonderful that they're going for something that is as authentic and true to that culture and those people and those stories as possible, because ultimately you if you're going to be making something that is of a certain people in a certain time in a certain place, the how acceptable that is in the 1980s versus 2024, you are going to want to today try to be as authentic and as really as respectful as you possibly can, and I think that this illustrates how you can do that, and if anything it enhances the experience of the game.
Absolutely. Yeah, you really feel that level of they actually talked about this in that same Game Rant interview, but you feel that authenticity and what feels like respect as well, to me. And yeah, same here. There's not much I can speak on. Kind of like I'm like, oh, this, if it were like a Scottish music or composition, I'd be like, oh, that seems Scottish because some of these instruments feel right. But that's how a lot of this felt to me too, was authentic, and it was cool to see how they used specific instruments that you just may not hear in another game. I really appreciated that. Well, Chris, as we sort of wrap up here, do you have any closing thoughts or like the last thing you'd like to say about your time with Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm as a person who has played at least the Prince of Persia series, since the beginning, and didn't really get into it with Sands of Time, but after Sands of Time I just became very interested in everything new that they were doing with the series, and then to see it fade away for a long time, or have all these false starts and never get back going again, to have it come back not only with an excellent game, but we've gotten past this point now where like everything has to be it needs to be a third person AAA camera over the shoulder 3D exploration game, or it's not taken seriously as a real video game. We're so past that now, where something can come out and be a super zoomed out 2D Metroidvania, and garner the level of respect and a critical acclaim that it has gotten. I think that is indicative of the fact that we're in a much better place now, where a wide spectrum of game designs can be really impactful in that way. So again, like, I'm so excited that it came back. I think it's wonderful that it came back in this way. I think it's weird that people probably considered Metroidvania before for Prince of Persia, and it would have fit so well. But it just didn't make sense economically, or would have maybe been laughed out of the room, that like, well, no, let's make it like, like Nintendo's old Metroid games, but we're at a place now where that form is just so much more respected. It was wonderful. And I can't wait to see, where we go from here.
I'm very excited too. And, this interview for this episode is coming at an interesting time, where we just had the announcement of a Prince of Persia roguelike last week. So I'll be really interested to see how that turns out as well. And it's not, it's not going to be a continuation of this story or this exact style of game, but it's exciting. Well, Chris, this has been so fun to talk to you for the first half of this episode. I'm sorry that we couldn't connect you with Nick. He sends his regards. But on our way out of the first half of this, I know you plugged some stuff up top, but what would you like to plug today on your way out? Where can people find you?
Sure. So, I'm on Twitter, and as Kobunheat, Kobunheat is my Twitter handle. I'm also on Blue Sky as just look for Chris Kohler. I think it's kohler.bluesky.social. I should probably it's Kohler, but then it's like .bisky.social, and I should probably actually memorize that for podcasts. I'm there too. And that's a good place to find me. But I mean, if you're interested in what we're doing at Digital Eclipse, and hey, if you played the Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown and you want to see where it all started, you should check out the making of Karateka. We finally re-released, Jordan Mechner's original, debut game, and but not only have we re-released the game, but we delve into the story behind it, and it's gonna give you. It's like, if you like Prince of Persia, like, go back to where it all started. That's really what I want to say
Awesome.
at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, people should definitely check it out. And I know we talked a bit, a little, kind of extensively up top about the great things that you and the team at Digital Eclipse are doing. But yeah, definitely check it out, everybody. Well, Chris, as I leave you here halfway up Mount Koff, I'll say that I'm leaving you in that nice area where there's the hub, there's the forge person, the shops.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't want to leave you in a dangerous spot, but
People to talk to. Yeah.
exactly. But for this podcast, this is the end for you. We'll see you later. Feels like days, perhaps weeks, since I left Chris Kohler in the dust halfway up Mount Koff. I believe I left him in the library, but I'm feeling lonely. The one thing I could really use is an immortal, is another member to sort of shepherd me through this process. And wow, conveniently, as I turn a corner, if it isn't Nick Limon. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I'm sniffing in case my mic's not picking up the sniffs.
Yes, good sniffs.
What I'm picking up a scent of what is that Japanese curry? Is that a Koko Ichiban? Is that go-go curry?
You have a nose of a wolf on a hunt, Nick. You couldn't have been more correct. Well done. It smells like that, and then also, I don't know, decaying time stuff, I guess.
Yeah, what does that actually smell like? What does it smell like on Mount Koff?
That's a good question. I bet it
Just
depends on the.
dust?
Yeah, probably dust in a lot of the areas and sand in the like snake pit area. But Nick, I'm so glad to have you on the show, dude. We're gonna introduce you and talk about you and let you tell yourself about the listener. But you've been on at least one co-op episode, which was the first ever when we discussed Breath of the Wild almost 4 years ago.
Oh
So
my gosh.
which is crazy. You're a veteran of the pod. You were also one of the earliest guests on the regular edition of the show. I think it was episode 16 where you talked about Chrono Trigger.
Yep.
And back when we recorded in Jeremy's little studio, but you're back on the show. I'm so glad to have you to talk about the Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. But before we get into that, what do you want to share with the listener about yourself? It's been a minute since you've been here.
Oh yeah. So hi everybody, I'm Nick Limon. If you've heard me back on the original episode, I am still a employee over at IGN. I am currently a supervising producer, but apart from that, I'm just usually spending most of my time playing and or thinking way too much about video games and of course movies and stuff. And yeah, I probably should do more with it, but at this point it's like, oh man, there's so much going on. But one of these days I'll do something.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing so much, and yeah, I mean, it's you've been there for over 4 years at this point. Was that within your first year of working there when you first came on the show?
I think I joined in, like, 2018
Okay.
IGN. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it was, like, 2019 I was on the show or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I
I
think.
do not recall, but it's been a minute.
Yeah. And you and I mean, it's also been so long that I may as well bring it up again. Is that you and I know each other because we went to college together at Azusa Pacific. We were both. You were a screenwriting major, or were you a?
Yeah, I was a screenwriter. I was technically a cinematic arts major with an emphasis in screenwriting because
Yes.
the way I saw it, I was like, I'm never gonna have to touch any production equipment. And lo
Look
and
at you
behold,
now.
5 years later, 10 years later, I am almost exclusively touching production equipment and writing. So
Yes.
don't neglect one over the other, folks.
Yes. Oh gosh, that's so funny how that works. Well, yeah. So we've known each other for over 10 years at this point. I think if we were to get specific, we probably met in because I know we took a screenwriting class with Dr. P. Um, and that was my sophomore
Yes.
year, at least in
Um,
like 2010, 2011. So yeah, I don't need to date it, but it's been a while.
yeah, I joined APU as a freshman in 2010, so I must have been like 18. Yeah, I
Yes.
should have been 18. So yeah, I semester together with a lot of our classes. So yeah, a lot of our production and whatnot stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
I was a
You were
pretty quiet dude back then, though. I was just of people, but lo and behold, after college is when I feel like really rekindled a friendship.
Yes, definitely. I remember, like, I can confirm that you definitely seemed reserved back then, in college, and were quiet. Especially, I mean, that makes sense. Getting into your freshman year at a place where who knows if you even knew anybody. But yeah, we worked. I think we brought this up too, but I'm as we're talking, I'm remembering. We also briefly worked on a friend's comic together, which I think we were just brainstorming narrative ideas. That's as far as I
Yeah, yeah.
worked on it, really. Um,
Mhm.
and then, yeah, rekindled stuff. I think it was like when the Switch was coming out, I saw you I didn't even know you liked video games, but you were posting about it on, like, Twitter and stuff, and so then I was, like, bugging you all the time about video games, and here we are.
I feel like I always remembered you because I forget what class it was, but it had to be like intro to screenwriting or something
Mhm.
where I remember that you were on your MacBook in class and you booted up an emulator. So I was just watching you play through. I think it must have been like a I think it might have been Mega Man or a Mega
Yeah,
Man X or something.
something
And
like
I
that.
just was like, this dude's homie's playing the Super Nintendo in his college class. Mad lad, I love it.
Yes, yeah, that shows you how much I was, really focused in the classroom. I remember I must have done that. I do have a memory of being in a gosh, I don't remember what class it was, but a John Hamilton class. Did you ever have, Dr. Hamilton for
Oh, yeah.
anything?
Oh, yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
remember specifically playing through parts of Metroid Fusion clumsily.
That's what it was. It was
Okay.
Metroid, yes.
I can truly, I remember the lights were off and anyway, memory lane, fun stuff. But I'm so glad to have you back on the show. Did you get to share everything with the listener that you wanted about yourself already?
I mean, if you ever have any interest in learning more about me, I don't know, God forbid, why would you wanna do that? But oddly enough, speaking of APU, they hit me up semi recently. We're like,
Whoa,
"Hey, we're doing this thing where we have the alumni come on and talk about their career." And so, like, I was invited to actually speak to a class
no
via
way.
Zoom. And I was like, "So what do you guys want me to do?" They're like, "Just tell us about your career path, and that way you can show our students like everything that's possible once you graduate school." So I was like, "You just want me to talk about me for an hour?" I was like, "All
Yeah.
right, that's fine." But my God, I do not envy teachers having to teach via remote situations because I am 32 years old. I felt like I was gonna get swirlied afterwards. It was just radio silence. I was like, "All right, anybody have any questions for Nick?" Radio silence, just
Oh my gosh.
crickets chirping. I was like, "Oh my gosh, my entire life is a fraud. What's going on?" But
Gosh.
I talked about a lot there. But yeah, don't talk to college kids. They're scary. They're still scary.
No, I'm not going back. I'm too scared. If I get that invitation, which I also don't know why they would do that, then I will refuse it and based on your experience. But great, Nick. Well, again, so happy to have you back on the show. We're going to talk about this is the second half of our co-op episode 46 on the Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Before we get into that game and anything that we want to share together, would you tell myself and the listener a little bit about your history with the series, however small or large?
Yeah, I mean, Prince of Persia is a strange one in that it's never been a game that it's never been a series that I've like, oh my gosh, I gotta play the new Prince of Persia. But I've always been cognizant of it in the past. And I remember first playing the original Prince of Persia, like the DOS version. I probably emulated it through DOSBox or
Wow.
however you would have done that back in the day. And I just remember like always seeing videos of it and trailers and just like I was always drawn to how it was animated, the rotoscoping of it, and how
Yes.
just like authentic it looked. Like it looked like a Ralph Bakshi movie to me. I
Mm,
didn't know who Ralph Bakshi was, but I was just like, oh, I've seen influences of this before. I've seen it copied in other places, and
yeah.
I think it's really cool that they made a game like that. And that and the kind of uh the the agileness of the prince himself. I've always thought that was so cool, the way he would run up to a pit and kind of teeter a little bit,
Yeah.
and you could see like there's realistic momentum. So that was always a really big appeal to me. And then back when on the GameCube, I playing through Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. I think that was a renaissance for a lot of people with Prince of Persia, just thinking like, oh my gosh, time travel in a video game, like that's such a cool way of telling a story. If you die in the game, it's like, no, 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 the story didn't happen that way. And I was
Yes.
just, it was that early 2000s gimmick of we did time travel first, therefore everything we do with time travel is infinitely fascinating to you, a 10-year-old. Um, and then it got to the point where I knew Prince of Persia, because it then became the point where I was no longer allowed to play the games, because the sequel to Sands of Time, Warrior Within, was an M-rated game. And I remember it was just like peak mid 2000s edge lord M rating, where the game opens on like a scantily clad woman, then you fight people and there's blood. And I just remember like sneaking over to a cousin's house to play the game and just like,
Yes.
oh man, I do not like the way this game feels at all. Like the combat to me just felt so rough in
Oh,
comparison to the first game. And then of course, I at that point I was like, all right, I think I'm good with Prince of Persia. The Two Thrones came out, which was the third game in the trilogy, if I'm not mistaken. And then
I will be
the
fact checking that, so you're fine.
I never watched the Disney Jake Gyllenhaal Prince of Persia movie, but
Me
then they made a
neither.
game based on that. And so that's where I was like, yeah, I think I'm pretty good on Prince of Persia at this point in my life. But then lo and behold, Ubisoft releases Lost Crown, and they announced it, and it's like, huh, a 2D side-scrolling Prince of Persia. It's like me initially as a 31-year-old. I guess that's kind of cool. And then
Yeah.
I was like, wait a second, it's a Metroidvania. Me sitting up in my seat a little bit more. I was like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm interested. And then just seeing the game in action was the thing that truly won me over. And I think that's I never made the comparison until now, but it's the almost the poetry of motion that I think
Mm,
is why I care about Prince of Persia now. Looking back all these years later, I was drawn to the original game because of how realistically they portrayed momentum, and now in Lost Crown, it's how movement is fun in video games, because
yeah.
I think a lot of games struggle with that. A lot of games don't feel good to play, and I think that Lost Crown has that in spades, where everything you do in the game feels good, and that's why I think I locked into the game. And apart from that, just the presentation of it's gorgeous. The like cinematic Metroid Samus Returns like
Yeah.
style counters that have like these really cinematic zooms. They find a way to add a touch of cinema to a Metroidvania in a way, honestly, that I think blows Samus Returns out of the water. But yeah, that was a lot of talking, but
You're all
I
good.
think I was just figuring it out all on the spot. But that's what I got.
I love it. That's great. Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Chris earlier, and this is my introduction to the series. I've been aware of the series since I've been playing video games, especially the Sands of Time, being like that I was such a GameCube kid. And I also told him I vow to play that later this year. And I might even be doing it's tentatively on the schedule for a future co op episode because I'm like, enough people love this game. I can get someone to play it with me. Um, but yeah, this was also new to me. This is a bit of a side question. But when I think about that original, from what I've seen, the original Prince of Persia, it reminds me so much of like some Eric Chahi games, like Another World, and
Oh
just with like
yeah.
sort of the rotoscoping and the movement. Have you ever touched that game at all?
I think I've played out of this
I think
world.
they're the same one. Yeah,
That and oh, what is it? It was a PlayStation 1 game in
Eternal
the
Dark,
same
or no, sorry, Heart of Darkness.
Heart of Darkness. Yes.
Yes,
Heart of Darkness is one of the scariest like animated intros, and just some gruesome deaths all centered
yes.
around a little kid. That was one of the oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that game. Yeah. It 100% is evocative of that. Yeah.
Yes. I just with the rotoscoping and sort of the way that the characters are animated, I was like making that connection yesterday, so I'm glad to be able to talk about it today. But that's great. So, as far as getting into the game, it was something you had seen a little coverage about, and then it wasn't until like seeing it in action and learning more about, I guess, the genre that you were like, all right, I think I'm going to pick this up.
Yeah, I think the thing that had really perked my ears was the fact that it was a Metroidvania, and in 2024, it'd been a while since I touched one that I really loved,
Sure.
and a lot of my coworkers were like, "Nick, you got to pick up Lost Crown. You'd love it." And I was like, "All right, I will." And I think I ended up, and this is not paid programming by Ubisoft, but I did sign up for their Ubisoft Plus or whatever
Oh,
their membership is, because it's like 17 bucks one time fee, and then obviously it's recurring every month. But I figured I could probably beat this game in less than a month, and you just get the game for free essentially. So I
wow.
paid 18 bucks, get the game for free for a month, and then I just kind of vowed to finish it in one month. Lo and behold, I finished in about a less than a week.
Dang, not bad. So it sounds like, and this isn't something I've gotten into yet on the show, I don't believe that this game for you was something that you didn't really put down that week.
No, yeah, I played it from beginning to end, pretty much exclusively on. I played it on PC, but I played
Oh,
it on PC via, like my PC connected to my TV, and also Steam Deck, because I just basically installed the Ubisoft launcher on my Steam Deck, so I'd play it on the go and treat it like a Switch. Because right now I currently resent the Switch for not being a 1080 60 frame rate device.
yes, and will we ever see a Switch that's like that? Who's to say? But that's cool. So I was just kind of curious about your journey and how you got into it. When this game grabbed you and you sort of wolfed it down that week, what do you think that it was about the game that just got its hooks in you first?
I think it would have to be just the pretty staggering like the staggering amount of verbs that the game kind of allows you to discover,
Hmm.
because like all the upgrades in the game are fun. Like every single upgrade is fun, and going back to like the movement that I really love, I think this was the first time it stood out to me that every single upgrade made moving around in the game way more fun and way more challenging. And I loved all of the platforming that was present in the game so much that I was hungry for every single one of those platforming challenges that are all completely optional. But I just found it so fun to be able to, double jump and transport a version of yourself by throwing a ring out and
Yes.
teleporting forward while creating a copy of yourself in the past to activate a switch over here, and then putting yourself rewinding time so that you like wind up outside of a door that you just barely closed. Like that stuff was so fun, and I think that's where I find myself gravitating more towards like what I love about 2D platformers. And it kind of goes back to like something like Hollow Knight, right? Like Hollow Knight's Path of Pain, which is an optional like mini dungeon that's all centered around platforming, was one of my favorite things to do in the game, because I just love a good hard as nails platformer that really demands 100% from the player. It's a game, like I think the thing that Lost Crown really does a good job at is when you are playing it at a high level, it is because you understand every single thing that you can do as a character, but also where the barriers of your move set is.
Mm.
So like I know exactly by just looking at the screen, I can tell how far I can throw my ring so that I can teleport to it. And I know exactly how jumps feel so that I can avoid all of the different platforming hazards that the game throws at me. And I think that is just when you design a 2D platform, I think it shows just an utmost sign of respect for the player that you will expect them to master every single ability you throw their way. And sure, it doesn't impede your progress because a lot of this stuff is optional, but it's just so fun for the players who really want to push themselves. And I really, really respect that. And I have so much fun doing that.
Yes, this it's kind of no surprise to me that we ended up sort of kicking off both parts of this episode with an emphasis on the locomotion and the traversal, especially when it comes to the like platforming that you're talking about. I found that uh, this game was really successful, in my opinion, in helping sort of fold in each of those abilities as you would get them. And it never, to me, felt too overwhelming, like, oh, I have too many tools at my disposal. Or sometimes in games when you have a wide skill set, I'm like, oh, I haven't used this like incredible ability in like tens of hours because I just forgot that I had it. Whereas, and I wonder what the game did that made that work for me. It might just be that, like, as you're going through the world, you instinctually are using your different abilities, whether it's, yeah, throwing the, like, chakram, like, spinning arrow to teleport to it, or just, like, a simple wall jump or the like you said, the copy ability. I was just really impressed with that, so it's kinda no surprise that we got back to this.
I think it's and this is going to a thing that I've been like personally. I have like a project that I'm working on the back end, and it's kind of like a soft tease of why do some games feel better than others,
Mm,
and I think that's what the Lost Crown has in spades. Like I think there's a very obvious criticism that you can lob at the Lost Crown about how stingy it is with its fast travel points and how it can be a
mm,
little bit of a nuisance to fast travel to get kind of within distance of where
yeah,
your objective is, but it never really bothered me because for the most part, as long as you make movement fun in your game and you give me the ability to make my way through the same area but faster,
mhm,
I kind of treat it like a speedrunner mentality where I just want to see how quickly I can get through an area I've already been
yes,
through and how stylishly I can do it. And it just feels good. Like the only other game I could think of that is like pure feel goodness is Phantom Pain, where it just I understand every single thing I can do as a player
yes.
character in the game, and it all feels like it's playing fair with that range of movement.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. The one, truly I played Metal Gear Solid 1 through 4, and Phantom Pain is just on my backlog. As you were saying that too, especially when it comes to the traversal, like, part of the reason why, at least for me, playing the Spider-Man games, I don't mind n not I almost never fast traveled in 2 because I just
Mhm.
still like flying around the city. I would say by the end, I was utilizing fast travel more because I was right at the end of the game. But yeah, this game did a similar thing. And I would say, like, there were definitely times where I would be like, well, I'm trying to get back to this space, and neither of these points are like convenient, but let's have fun." This is sort of like something that I never would have thought I would talk about, but when you are sort of speed running through these areas, having enemies just like swing and miss on you as you are dodging them with your acrobatics is really
Oh
fun to
yeah.
see them flail.
It's satisfying and also just like even I start to work in like the idea of how fast can I kill this dude while I'm continuing to make my
Oh
way
yes.
through on the speed run. And it's just it all feels like a free running game. Like it feels like Mirror's Edge but put in a Metroidvania 2D platformer. Like there's just something about the ebb and flow of movement that is just it all piggybacks one off each other, all the abilities, and there's just it's such a joy to move around.
Yeah, absolutely. I the most recent Metroidvania that I had played outside of like replaying Metroid games was Ori and the Blind Forest, and that game
Mm.
also, I think its strength, I would say, is also in the traversal, and how by the end when you're utilizing your abilities, you really can just flow through a level. And I think this game also succeeds really well in that, but has even better uh compared to, at least personally compared to that game, even more satisfying combat. You're some what were you gonna say something? Sorry.
Well, no, no, no. You were 100% on there. I just also like the thing that stands out to me above Ori is the discoverables. Like I think that finding items in Lost Crown is really fun. Like just discovering hidden rooms that I didn't know that this was going to be like a Castlevania situation where I accidentally hit a wall and lo and behold it's a secret wall and now I'm in a hell room with needles on the floor and the ceiling spikes, and now I have to carefully navigate my way to get like an optional health upgrade or something like that. And it's just like, ooh, I love stuff like that. That's always fun.
Yeah, I'm with you. Did you find yourself seeking out the majority of that? Because this was a game that I didn't 100% it, but I tried to be as thorough as possible without really and I don't care if I personally could care less if people look stuff up. Play the game how you want to play it, but
Oh yeah.
um, I I didn't end up looking much up. But I felt like I was like, how is there more stuff? I feel like I scoured this place. Were you also sort of like searching in that same level?
Yeah, I think it's like equal parts being in awe of just how gigantic the map is. Because when you start the game, it's really hard to gauge how big the map is. But then as you make your way through the game with every like major story beat, you're like, well, surely this is all that the map has to offer. And then it's like, oh no, there's just caverns underneath the underground area. There's an area above the sky area, and it's just like, wow. It's just a gargantuan map to explore full of cosmetics, which I always appreciate. I love a good cosmetic upgrade.
Mhm.
I don't like it when games make me look different and it changes my abilities, because then it's like I hate getting weakened and wearing better armor, better
Yeah.
looking armor. So I like that there's a bunch of cosmetic stuff that is all like badge of honor style bragging right stuff, because
Yes.
it's all like the platforming hell puzzles are the cosmetic things. And then there's the Metroid style upgrades where it's just I get more arrows, I get more health or whatever. And I just really like stuff like that. And then the shopkeeping system, I really enjoyed the upgrade system. What is it? Not badges like Hollow Knight, but what is it that the
Amulets.
necklace, the amulets that you put
Yes.
on the necklace? I just really big fan of all of the microsystems that are in place that make you feel like you are making some major progress in the game, which is just really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both being rewarded by those collectibles and also another reward for me just felt like when, yeah, you'd sort of stumble into an area or like, plow into a secret spot and you would be greeted by one of those platforming challenges or even like a combat challenge. I would feel like it's sort of the classic I shift forward on the couch a little bit and put my elbows
Yeah.
on my knees to play. Even
But then but then you get the moment too where it's like, "Wait, I don't think I can do this puzzle yet." And then they include one of the greatest features I think I've ever seen in a video
oh,
game, where you could just take a screenshot of a room, it pins it on your map, so you can always reference, "Wait, where was that spot I forgot
yes.
about?" And just open the map, it's there. And I feel like if you're designing a Metroidvania, there's no reason to not include something like that from here on out.
I'm totally with you. It feels like a feature that you just need to find a way to do it and just give props to the Lost Crown if you're making any game that maybe even has this level of exploration. Go
It's the
ahead.
equivalent of using wind and leaves to guide you to your next
Yes.
location in an open world game, where it's like, well, yeah, that's just the coolest way you could do this. So yeah, I feel like every game from now on should have this sort of feature.
Absolutely. I think I remember first hearing about because I had been hearing about this game. I believe it was talked about this already on this episode, but I believe it was revealed or there was a big trailer for it at Summer Games Fest last year. But the first person I heard talk about this game was Janet Garcia on the MinMax show, and Janet specifically, she was talking about how like that it would seemed to be of just such a high quality in a lot of the areas we've already talked about, but when she mentioned that feature, I was like, having had recently replayed Super Metroid, I was like, what I would have given to have a feature like that.
Like all you ROM hackers out there, let's go ahead and add that to every single Metroidvania.
I would love that, and I think to that feature's credit, almost every time if I used one of the memories, um, which might be what it's called, I could look at the image and discern, like, whether or not I had the ability to go to you to sort of, I guess, what am I trying to say? To get to solve the puzzle, whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah, exactly it. That's
Mhm.
exactly it. And like again, a lot of those things are just optional upgrades that you don't need. But the fact that it's like, oh well, it's so easy to just get over there now that I have X, Y, and Z abilities. It's great. And
Yes.
like we like one thing that's wild to me is like I talked a little bit about how much I like the shop system and the
Yeah.
upgrade system that's in the game. I like it because I love it when games offer you the ability to do new things via your upgrades that you can find that are optional. So like the upgrades in the shop that add third or fourth or fifth or sixth different combos to your combo system is just so fun. And then just gets into the idea of like, how satisfying the combat is in the game to
Yeah.
slide under an enemy's legs, knock them up into the air, and then combo them with like a fighting game style combo. It feels nice.
Absolutely. I couldn't well, I was very impressed with how much I enjoyed the combat in this game. And part of that, the fun for me was discovering how I wanted to play and what worked for me. And that influenced how I sort of utilized that amulet system or the upgrade system. I know it's been a while for you. But do you have any memories on like how you built your character or the strengths that you leaned on when it came to combat?
For sure, air juggling was my favorite thing to do in the game because I just basically made it a personal game of how long can I keep this enemy in the air and how cool can I make this look before they die and or hit the ground. And yeah, I think that was just my favorite part. And I also really love the optional mini boss encounters where you
Mm,
encounter different timeline versions of your main character, where you
yes.
are basically fighting against yourself with similar abilities and figuring out like, okay, this is what I always do. How do I counter that? And I
Yes.
just think that's like such an ingenious. I'm always a sucker for games where you have to fight yourself, a
Yeah.
la Final Fantasy IV, Cecil fighting his Dark Knight version when he becomes a paladin. Like all that stuff is my favorite thing in the world. If you add that in the game, I will immediately like it more. So, or Earthbound, right?
Yes. Of course, your favorite example probably being, fighting, Bowser Jr. In Super Mario Sunshine when he's just like the evil Mario.
Yes, we
No,
chase him around Delfino Plaza.
gosh, as a kid, I did hate that part, but when I replayed it, I was like, "This is more manageable than I remember." But, yeah, or Dark Link, easy, bunch of great examples
All good
there.
stuff. Iconic. It's always iconic every
Yes.
time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I ended up there was a lot of things that I specialized in and just really leaned on those abilities. I was telling Chris this before, but I really honed in on air attacks. And because I think early on I found this one upgrade that essentially just boosted all damage that I did while I was in the air. And so then that not only like influenced how I played, but it gave me an incentive to learn the skills a little better. I felt like there was a bunch of stuff with Sargon's abilities that, depending on if you hold like the attack button longer or you hold down when you attack, he would have sort of different like expressions and movements. Like one thing that I would do a lot with the lighter enemies was I think if you held down on the control stick and attacked, you would sort of like cut the feet of an enemy and then slam them in the ground so they'd pop in the air. And
Yep.
essentially it was just like bouncing them up and down like I was dribbling a basketball for a
It
while.
feels so good. It feels
Yes.
so good. And it's just the game is firing on all cylinders, whether it be platforming or combat. It all just feels good together. And I know there's been a lot of complaints about the boss encounters in the game, but my God, again, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I thought the combat with the boss encounters was so much fun. It's not quite bullet hell esque, but I love that it feels like almost like a dancing rhythm game where I'm just like in the groove and in the zone of understanding and reading my enemy and
Oh,
figuring out how I need to use all of my abilities to not take any damage, because that's really all you need to do. Like your framing for combat, like with bosses, should just be how do I avoid damage every single time, because that's your key to solving the puzzle of each boss encounter. And it's just so fun. It's so
yes.
fun.
I think that was something that this game did that I thought that blew me away about Metroid Dread as well, was the bosses and the design and the patterns, and when you could recognize those, and even if you might fail the first time, you get back up again, and you're picking up another new pattern, and then so you're getting a little deeper and a little further, and I love that. I think there's a bunch of bosses I loved in this game, even if I got my ass kicked a handful of times, but one that it just came to mind that I felt like I was really in the groove you were talking about, with the pattern recognition and sort of the dancing around was the deceased king at the top of the mountain. It's sort of like the second to last boss. Um, you sort of like find him in the ice like mountain that you're climbing,
Oh,
but
yes, yes, that one's really fun. Oh my gosh, hell yeah, that
I
one rocks.
I remember the first time I did it, I was like, "How am I supposed to beat this?" But just with, like, some perseverance and focus, it was just a joy. Do you when you think about the boss encounters, are there any of those that stick out to you? All this distance in the future.
Well, I really love they're the immortals, right?
Yes.
I really love the immortals as boss encounters because it's a great like natural checkpoint in the game to be like, have you been paying attention? Do you know how to use all your abilities? And I like it for a couple reasons because one, it's like a nice mirror to the structure of the story. People that Sargon was working with, people that he was an immortal alongside his fellow buddies, and then
Yes.
they all turn against him. And it's like I know exactly what this game is when the uh you know end of act one twist happens where you're not only like kind of in shock that you aren't the Prince of Persia,
Yes.
but the fact that you see what happens at the Prince of Persia and you realize what you're going to have to do to beat the game. And it's like, oh, I know all of these dudes, I know what they do. And I know that I'm going to have to fight them over the course of the game. And they're all going to test you in one very specific way. And it's just such a smart way to marry storytelling with combat encounters. So, again, all of the immortals are really fun, but I think my favorite was and I think it was like a griffin. Was there a griffin? Like
That
a
sounds
like a
I think there was. Yes, it
griffin,
it
and
might be in,
then
like, the forest or something like that.
I think that sounds right because again, it's been a minute, so I
Yeah.
apologize on that front. But that one, and then also the forested area where there is a like undead queen commanding like a is it a giant snake?
I don't remember what the animal is, but that was maybe the most times I died to a boss, now that you bring it up.
That one was fun. Very, very
Yeah.
fun. But I think the thing that stands out to me the most when I think about the Lost Crown is everything leading up to the big buff immortal guy.
Yes.
The just the sheer like this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in a video game is when you step into that entire like platforming area with him at the end and it's just an ocean frozen in time. That has to be one of the coolest things you could
Mhm.
like one of the coolest places you can set a game. So one, you're just navigating like a war-torn ocean with a bunch of ships all in progress of being shipwrecked. Things are on fire. There's pieces of the mast floating in the air that you can use as like wall jumps and it's just such an inventive fun setting for a platformer. And then once you stop the frozen in time, it's then like a completely different level moving backwards. And it's just such a smart, fun, cool setup where I felt challenged every single time to go for the optional items that were hidden just out of reach. That's another thing this game
Yes.
does very well is it teases you with things that you can see, but you're like, it's gonna be a pain in the ass to get there, isn't
Yeah.
it? But it's just like, well, I think I can do it. And that like it's gonna be a pain in the ass to get there, but I think I can figure out a way to do it. It like hits the same dopamine centers of my brain that Mario Odyssey did, where it's like once you figured out how to move in the game, everything at your disposal, it's like I bet you I can get up there in a way that feels like you're always breaking the game, even
Yes.
though you're not.
Yes, I've had, like, Cappy in my head when thinking about the, like, traversal in this game the whole time because, yeah, when you in that game could get down the throw to long jump, to dive, to throw, to
Oh,
additional jump, it was like, "How should I even be able to do this?"
it
Similar
feels
set
like you're
Yeah.
breaking the game in a way. It's like, oh my gosh, the developers didn't think I'd do this, but it's like, no, 100% they knew exactly what you could do, and they've all designed this to make you feel that way, which makes them ultimately just it's just so genius on their part.
Absolutely. There would even be gosh, they did such a great job of exactly that with the design, and there were very, very few spots in this game where I would, like, test the limits of how high I could get on a wall or, like, could I climb over this thing, and there were very few times where they basically tell you, "No, we're stopping
Yeah.
your jump here," and I don't mind it, but it was still fun for me to sort of, like, poke and prod at those barriers because I so many times in the game, you ask yourself, "Can I do this?" And even if you don't have that ability then, at some point, you're gonna be able to.
Oh, it's all so good. And that and Like now I'm thinking about I think my favorite location, even though it was probably the most nightmare inducing, apart from the frozen ocean, is the sewers. I really
Oh,
like the sewers because it was such a pain in the ass, but in such a fun way that only sewers in video games can be fun. The
yes.
constantly rising poisoned water, the pixel perfect platforming that you have to do to in some of
Mhm.
the optional puzzles is so fun. And just I just really like the way the game leads you to where it wants you to go,
Yeah.
where you're following a thief who stole something from you deeper and deeper into the sewer. Like all that stuff is just so cool.
Absolutely. I feel like hearing you talk about the sewers, and I'm remembering some of the like gross, like humanoid creatures that would like come out of pipes after you pass them, or that would like explode on you. And it has me thinking that like a lot of your fandom of the Souls series and the and FromSoft games is like
Oh
rubbed
yeah.
off on you to where you're like, I like that stuff.
I like the gross boys.
As someone, like I know we've talked about the combat a bit, but I just kind of was curious as a big fan of FromSoft games. As far as this is different. It's a 2D side-scrolling action platformer. Um, is there any comparisons that you personally can draw to the Souls combat, whether it be timing, patience, precision? Because I'm not a I've opened up one Souls game, and it was probably the worst one to start, which is Sekiro, so I don't have a good comparison point for this, and I was just kinda curious.
I think it's a fair comparison because I think that there is something to the kind of parry system in the game that like
Mm,
I think when a lot of people who maybe don't have as much experience with like a Soulsborne style game, that is a lot of emphasis on parrying and like uh basically I don't know another way of putting it other than like stunning an enemy to set them up for like a visceral strike is
yes.
I think the fear of failure is a lot of thing that I think a lot of players who haven't played those games are maybe just less incentivized to interact with a parry system because they're afraid they don't want to take any damage and things like
Mhm.
that. But I don't know. I think I've been parry pilled, so it's just now, now I just love and live for getting up in an enemy's face and like really trying to study their attack patterns and things like that. And a lot of enemies do have that kind of Elden Ring boss thing where it's like, oh, this is a parry, sure, that you're trying to pull off. But now we're going to do the thing where the enemy's going to kind of fake you out a little bit,
Oh,
which I think is
gosh.
fun. And because you're studying their animation motion and when an enemy makes a move towards you, your immediate reaction is, "Oh, I block here because he's hitting me." It's like, that's not what's happening here. So I think that there is a equal level of you need to play the game aggressively in order to feel like how the developers want you to feel. But also, I think that there is a no, no, no. You also need to study the enemies to learn their different attack patterns, and you need like after once you're 10 hours into the game, like you can just rattle off everyone's different attack animation, whether you've been paying attention or not, because you just experienced it so many times.
Yes, absolutely. Whether it's like just some like small grunt that hits me on my last bit of health and I was lazy about, my about handling that, or a boss that just eviscerates me. I felt that for sure. I found that when it came to the parrying, especially with some of the harder bosses, that what eventually helped me get over some humps occasionally was engaging with that system. I think that the, like, deceased king, I wanna say his name was Darius, that might be the name. That boss specifically, once I finally was able to engage with the parry on his, like, because they have this, like, gold flash that'll occur, and you
Yeah.
can basically return like, a devastating blow. Once I did that, it really opened things up for me. I wasn't consistently great at it, but, like, I think made the difference in a few battles of, like, me actually defeating the boss. And then to your point, when you could there's not really I don't really remember there being, like, an ability to stun enemies in this game, but you might be able to, when you parry or make certain moves, throw them off their guard, and that's when I would just engage with, like, a powerful Athra Surge to just take can I just take a chunk off this health? Um, and yeah, I would say the Athra Surges are the one thing that I personally, found a couple things that worked for me, and then didn't really do a lot of changing. Do you remember, like, how you went about that system at all?
I think for the most part, like I was very much I used it as a means of like how can I whittle down this boss's health as fast as
Mm.
possible. So I used it as like an ult attack. But I think for the most part, every time I got a new one, as long as it seemed like something that's like, yeah, sure, I'll try it out,
Oh,
and
cool.
I'd basically just equip it immediately just to poke around with it. So I think I tried a fair number of them. But I'm a big fan of anything that Cloud Strife blade beams people, where you would basically shoot a wind blade forwards and basically create a projectile, an extra projectile. Those ones really fun.
Yeah, that's cool. I think I ended up speaking of our, like, the big, immortal who was on the boat. I wish I remembered his name, but I love that character too. I think when you defeat him, you get an ability where you essentially just do, like, a spin attack for a significant amount of time, and it
Yes,
envelops
that
what
one's really good.
that was probably the one that I really utilized.
There's a good counter one too, if I recall correctly, where it basically puts you in the the state of about to counter, and it's just whether or not an enemy hits you before it unleashes its full potential, which I really like too.
Oh, interesting. Dang, see, I should have toyed around with that. I would have maybe liked that one. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of fun ones in the game.
Yeah. We've talked about so many elements of this game that are so enjoyable and so well done by this team. Are there any like elements that we haven't touched on quite yet that you wanted to highlight on your time here?
I mean, I genuinely one of my favorite games of the year. I think if I had any serious criticisms of the game is that I think that by the time I rolled credits on the game, I was probably ready to roll credits on it like 5 hours earlier. It feels a
Sure.
little bit long for what it is, and the thing that I appreciate about it is that they continually give you upgrades well into the game, like way longer than you'd expect them to. So for that, I'm a big fan of always giving the player new toys to play around with if you're going to be a long game. But yeah, there's just a little bit of this is going a little too long, and sometimes I feel like it was just every now and then a minor nuisance to get to an optional objective to do something, or like where was that guy again that I needed to give this item to? How do I get back there? There's a little bit of that, but it was never enough to drive me away from the game because I think I ended up finishing the game at like 95% completion.
Wow, nice. I think I was around a similar space, and I want to say I played it for about 25-ish hours, which to me too, I was expecting something closer to 15. And even though I engaged with, everything I could in the game, by the end, even though I was like someone who couldn't say no to stuff, I was also just ready to move on as well. Well, that's amazing. Was that sort of like your final, thoughts on the game, or do you wanna put a bow on just whatever place, like, this held for you this year?
I think above all, like I think the thing apart from the movement being really fun, I think it's emphasis, and I think the thing that it really shines over something like Mercury Steam's Metroid Samus Returns is that those special boss encounter counters
Oh,
always they're one always satisfying to pull off because one you just do a lot of damage, but two they did a good as hell job art directing the heck out of every single boss encounter to feel like this game is not an anime in any way shape or form, but it is very evocative of like those high octane anime moments that are larger than life that feel like you are a superhero, and every single time you pull one of them off you feel like you did something that nobody else could do, which is like a very rare feeling to do in a video game that is a mass marketed product to,
yeah.
millions of players all around the world. So like the fact that they're able to capture that moment in combat, it's always so well done. So hats off to the developers there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's probably something that we talked about some of the least between both halves of this podcast is like the art direction and the animation, which like I was really positive on overall. But yeah, I've gotten to say so much piece on this game too. It's I haven't played enough this year, but it's currently my personal favorite game that I have seen all the way through. I haven't finished Rebirth like you have. I'm 40 hours in, aka I don't know, 40% of the way through that game. But this was such an amazing experience, especially as someone who is more of a recent, and when I say that, I mean the last 4 years, a recent Metroidvania fan. Like, it's one of those genres that I really can't get enough of and that I enjoy the loop so much. And this game, I think, succeeded or exceeded my expectations in a big way. And yeah, I'll be excited to see what this team does next. I don't believe this is the team that's working on the roguelike that's supposed to come out, the Prince of Persia roguelike.
Right. No, this is a different team entirely, and that new Prince of Persia roguelike looks more evocative of like the original game.
Yes. Yeah, maybe, like, splits the difference between the original and this sort of version, but yeah, anyway, Nick, thank you so much for joining, to discuss, the Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown with me on another co-op episode. On your way out today, pal, what would you like to plug? Where can the people find you?
Nothing to plug other than if you are interested in following me on the internet everywhere, you can do that at Advent Nick. I'm that on all of the platforms.
I love it. Well, great. Now, now that I, thankfully with a friend, have reached the top of Mount Kof, I guess you're sort of, in a way, you're sort of like the prince who I guess I'm looking at myself as Sargon, who
Or maybe I was you the entire time from a different timeline.
you know what? I like that better. We're each other. That's good. We've conquered, we conquered the game. And on our way out, I'm just gonna close this out with some plugs of my own for the show. Uh, Call Me by Your Game. The cover art is done by Glenn J. You can find all of his great work on Instagram at Glenn with two N's .J A Y. The show is produced, edited, and the original music that you hear up top is by Jeremy Schmidt. You can thank him by checking out his podcast, Video Games, a comedy show, wherever you get yours. This podcast is also featured on social media on Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter, and even TikTok. So there'll probably be a highlight from this episode on TikTok. So follow us there. There's links in the show notes to all the stuff that we're plugging today. You can follow me on social media as well, on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky if you'd like. I stream video games on Twitch at twitch.tv/consiscool69, where by the time this comes out, I think I'll probably be at the end of my BioShock playthrough, which is what we're playing for our current games club over at Super NPC Radio on our Patreon. If you're a patron and you're listening to this episode as an engineer toad, thank you so much for supporting us. It means the world. And if you're listening to this, or I guess watching on YouTube, thank you as well. If you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Maybe if you know somebody else who loved The Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, you can share this episode with them as well. But that's pretty much it for the housekeeping. I'll descend from this mountain, and that'll do it for Call Me by Your Game co-op episode 46. We will see you on the next one.